I hope everyone can hear me. I think we've got a few internet problems this evening. It's a great pleasure today to be here with two of, I'd say, our contemporary riders, our best contemporary riders at the moment. We're very lucky to have with us today John Shubert and Mike Broadwith. Can you both hear me?
I can.
Good.
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear, Rachel. Pleasure to be here.
I'm just a bit confused because my image is frozen on my screen. So this is our first event we've done for Newbie Velo, where the idea is we're going to get someone to come in every week or so, probably someone from the club, but we thought we'd start it off with a bang with two of my absolute heroes who we've been very, very lucky to get on this evening. This is designed to be an interactive Q&A. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to ask John and Mike to introduce themselves. And then after that, we're going to have a little panel discussion. And then I'm going to ask everyone who's watching if they can play, put questions in the Q&A and people will answer them. I'm just being told, is it working? Okay. Yeah. So if you can write in your questions as we're going live in the Facebook chat, then we'll come to them just as soon as we can. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Jonathan Shubert. Now, Jonathan is a bit of a legend, just like the other legend we got here. If you've had any copy of Cycling Weekly or even the mainstream media over the last few weeks, you'd have seen John's incredible sub 3 hour, 100-mile ride. So Jonathan, if you'd just like to introduce yourself and the kinds of things you've been up to and really blow your own trumpet, which can be pretty hard.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I'm John Shubert, 33 years old, been riding a bike competitively since I was about 14. And in that time, I think some of the most notable things I've managed to achieve on a bicycle include pedaling around the world, winning the national 24-hour time trial, British Best All-Rounder, which is quite a prestigious season-long time trialing championship here in the UK. And most recently, which has definitely garnered the most attention, is breaking the Road Records Association 100-mile time trial.
That's a very modest introduction, Jonathan, but I'm sure we'll hear more about your exploits later. Now we're just going to switch to Mike. Mike's record was a little longer ago. I think it was 2018, wasn't it, Mike, that you got the Land's End to John O'Groats record. Now, a lot of people do this ride. I think it's one of the most popular long-distance rides for a lot of cyclists to do. Most people will take a couple of weeks to do it, and you occasionally get some people who, really go for it and do it in 7 days, or I've even heard people doing it in 5 days. But Mike went a little quicker, and he actually got the world record for Land's End to John O'Groats. So, Mike, if you'd just like to say a bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm Mike Broadwith. I have been cycling for quite a long time. I was bought a bike by my parents as a graduation present a long time ago. I'm considerably older than Jonathan. And I used to do a lot of track racing, and then found out that although I really enjoyed it, I wasn't much of a sprinter. So found my way towards time trialing, along the usual route of Club 10s, and then finally plucking up the courage to have a go at an open event, and just really found, like a lot of long distance time trialists, I kind of enjoyed the races more and more as they got longer. And I had to go at 100 miles, and then was brave enough to have a go at 12 hours. And then after a fairly, a long time in time trialing, and all culminated in one Thursday evening where I had a pretty good conversation with Jonathan, actually. And he basically goaded me into having a go at the national 24-hour, which I thought, well, he looks pretty cool and he's managed to do it, so I should have a go at that as well. And I was fortunate enough to do fairly well in that on a couple of occasions. And then if you do well in the national 24-hour, the nature of it is that, people sidle up to you and try and coerce you into having a go at the end-to-end. I had actually previously ridden from Land's End to John O'Groats with two of my best friends when I was at university. But that was a journey more similar to the one that you just described. It took us 3 weeks and involved quite a few pubs, campsites, climbing Ben Nevis and at least 2 fairly grotty nightclubs. And I think at the end of that journey, I remember us having a conversation about how cool it would be to come back and do it at least fairly quickly. So yeah, it was really good, and it's quite an undertaking, but I got the confidence and an amazing team around me of helpers and supporters. And so yeah, as you said, in 2018, the team of us all went down to Land's End, and through a kind of combination of good luck and good legs and a fantastic support team, we were able to break the record, which had stood for a very long time. So that was a real privilege to be part of that team and to kind of be able to use that now as an opportunity to promote cycling, which is something I'm really passionate about, and to be sitting here with people like you and talking to all the people who are listening to this. So yeah, lovely to see you, and thank you very much.
Yes, I think you really opened up that record, Mike, to a lot of people knowing about it, and a lot of us lived and breathed that. We were sort of what we call dot watching. So Mike had a contraption where we could follow him in all his travels, and he did hit quite a tough period when you're just coming into Scotland, didn't you, Mike? And I personally quite like to hear just how you got through that, because I think your neck started to seize up. And you really had some atrocious conditions. I'd just like to know, and I think other people would be interested to hear, just how you managed to get through that tough time, because it really is more mind over matter when something like that comes in, because I know I'd have given up probably by Bristol if I got that far. So how do you get through those really tough times?
It's quite strange to talk about. I think it's so far from what you normally do in your usual life that, sitting here in my kitchen nice and warm and thinking about it, it feels fairly surreal to be talking about it. I think what's the big unknown about doing the end-to-end is that the huge majority of people who have attempted it have already ridden for 24 hours. But then it's after that you're going into the unknown. And you've got to combine with that the fact that you've waited for the favourable southwesterly winds, which will help you on your way, but they also tend to bring Atlantic storms with them. And so if you read through all the accounts of the past records, there are very few that have avoided the rain when it comes. And so when we rode, we set off and we had the tailwind that we wanted, and the first 24 hours went very well. But as we crossed into Scotland, that was when the rain hit us. And it was one of those things where, I'm not really averse to riding in rain. I don't mind it. But the problem was when you've been going for, as it was, 25, 27 or 29 hours, your resilience for the rain is just nothing that is not comparable to how you would normally feel. And I started to get very cold, and I started to have to change my kit over and over again. And it really was very heavy rain. And unfortunately, if we'd either been a couple of hours up the road or a couple of hours back further down the road, we would have avoided it. But as it was, the rain band basically followed us through the Highlands, and we had 11 hours of rain. And what I wasn't anticipating was that my neck muscles eventually gave up, and my neck just started to hang forwards on the bike, which kind of compromised my vision of the road in front and started to obviously panic my support crew. And the best way I found to describe it was to just really think that I like to picture that, inside your head, there's a kind of fire burning when you're doing a race. And if you're doing a 10 mile or a 25 mile, that fire burns really strongly. But as the races get longer, keeping the fire burning is really the priority. And I think, unfortunately, as I went into the mountains, and it was cold and wet, and I just started to lose self-belief, and I think the fire really started to go out. And my keenest memory is just that one big climb up into the Highlands, and it was absolutely pouring with rain. And I remember this very vividly, thinking, I just don't have any interest in doing this anymore. I don't have any interest in this record. I don't have any interest in being on my bike. I just want it to stop. And I think my support crew were aware of that, and they just stopped supporting me directly by the roadside, because they knew that if they were there, I would pull over. But of course, eventually I needed a feed. And so when I eventually saw them, I pulled over, and talked to them and basically pleaded with them to stop me riding. And I managed to convince my closest teammate, Tim, eventually that the best thing to do would be to can it all and go home. But then, fortunately, my wife was there, Helen, and she was having none of it. And she remarkably knew just the one thing that she could say to get me back on my bike, and which was to try and distract me from the fact that I had so far to go. And she kind of not shouted at me, but said very directly, you know, do you think you could just manage to keep going for 20 minutes? And I still remember now this kind of indignation that I had that someone would suggest that I couldn't ride a bike for 20 minutes. And I kind of said, of course I can do it for 20 minutes. And with that, she said, well, go on your hop and get cracking. And what was amazing was just that moment, that kind of fire inside me started burning again. And 20 minutes down the road, you know, nothing could have stopped me again. And I just got going. So it's absolutely 100% the truth that without this amazing support crew behind me, I would never have got close to this record. And without her being there and saying those words to me, I would have quite happily taken myself off to a comfy hotel room in Perth and just hidden under the duvet.
I think that's something we hear quite a lot with these long distance rides. It's not so much about the rider. Well, it obviously is. You put the effort in, but it's about having a really, really good team around you. And I know Jonathan had exactly the same thing around him. I've seen a lot of the photographs, and he had some really great support. Even had GCN coming along and filming you. But I think your challenges are a bit different from Mike. And one of the issues that you had very, very early on, and I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to, you had a chain issue. And a lot of people, and that happens at the beginning of a ride, they give up, particularly when you've got to average well over 30 miles an hour in order to break the record. What went through your mind when that happened, and how did you get yourself back on track?
I always find it, and a lot of people have said that to me, I find it strange that, because to me, that didn't actually faze me at all. And I find it strange to think that other people would think that that would faze them. And I think I set a record like Mike's across Oman that took 47 hours to cross the country. And I've traveled through some very difficult parts of the world, you know, almost a month of solitude. And at times you're literally, things I've done, I've been fighting for my survival. And I think the coping mechanism that I have learned is you just put the emotion out of your head and you find the quickest way to the finish line. You know, you realize something's slowing you down, but you can still get there. It's a small hump in the road, but you carry on going. So something as small as a 3-hour ride was, compared to things I've done in the past, wasn't particularly scary. And I'd started that 100-mile RA 100-mile with the confidence in my mind that I could dip well below 3 hours. So stopping for a minute for a chain wasn't too much of an issue. I knew my gears weren't working properly, so that was more at the back of my mind that I just had to be careful and keep a constant talk through the pedals.
Yeah, no, I think that's very that's very interesting, and I think that's what probably cuts you and perhaps a number of other riders apart. That this sort of mental ability and just complete and utter determination to achieve. I should say at this point that we've got a fantastic team of ladies in the club who participate on Zwift in a league, and I think their grittiness is very comparable to yours actually, because they'll race no matter what. They'll be falling apart. And Newbie Velo Cougars, yes, this is a shout out to you. But I think for both of you, you've obviously got to sacrifice quite a lot in your lives in order to put down what must be a very, very strict and probably quite a time-consuming training regime. Mike, I know you've got a very demanding job as a maths teacher, and your passion for maths is pretty astonishing. Anyone who doesn't follow Mike on Twitter, I really recommend you do. I think it's 24-hour maths, isn't it, Mike? Yeah, so 24-hour maths. He does some really entertaining tweets, and he does a lot of analysis as well about these long-distance rides. So if you need a graph, Mike's the man to do it. But Mike, given you are this full-time teacher, I'd be really interested to hear just how you fit in your training regime with teaching and all the marking you must have to do when you get home.
I'm only laughing, Rachel, because I know that you were teasing me before we came on air about how little training I do.
Cat's out the back.
I think that the benefits of a regular if you've got a job, the benefits of a regular commute are incredible. And I would go as far as to say I can't really imagine that anyone who has a job and a family would be able to train if they didn't commute, because it's just free time basically. And so, you know, I commute an hour each way every day, and so that's kind of 200 miles of training every week for free. And I find that if I do that, and I do it fairly briskly, you know, and if I'm in the mood, I attack the climbs and so on. That if I do that, then it doesn't necessarily take much more on top of that to get me into good shape for a race, because I'm doing it all year. And I think, you know, I do turbo sessions, and in the lead up to a race, I'll do turbo sessions in the evening after I've put the children to bed or after I've done my work. And I don't really mind doing a turbo session at 10 o'clock at night and finishing at 11:30. That's fine. I'm fortunate enough to not be fortunate enough to be able after I've put the children to bed in enormous amounts of sleep. After I've done my work. I don't really mind doing a turbo session at 10 o'clock at night and finishing at 11:30. That's fine. About this before. I'm not really a believer that fortunate enough to be able to put the children to bed. You need to do after I've done my work. I think I probably feel doing a turbo session. I have the confidence that I know I'm able to do long rides. I'm not really a believer that really long rides after I get the children to bed. You need to do I think I probably feel I have the confidence that I know I'm able to do an hour ride. I'm not really a believer that really long rides after I get the children to bed. You need to do long rides. I think I probably feel I have the confidence that I know I'm able to do an hour ride. I'm not really a believer that really easier to be after I get the children to bed. You need to do long rides. Ready and firm. When I do I have the confidence that I know that's basically fine nowadays. I'm not really a believer to easier to be after I get the children to bed. Ready and firm.
Mike, and I regularly see you starting your rides at 11 p.m. And I know in the past when you've discussed your training, there's a fairly well-known local course in Hemel Hempstead called the F1110, and it's one of the fastest, probably the fastest now, it's the fastest 10-mile course in the country. And Mike, I know as part of your training for Land's End to John O'Groats, you actually went and rode that course multiple times in the dark, in the middle of the night, as part of your training. And I think you were doing back-to-back 21-minute 10s on that course, which I know you'd blast that out of the stadium if you're doing it once in the daytime. But that's pretty impressive dedication.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Jonathan as well really enjoys. I know that Jonathan basically really enjoys riding his bike, as I do, and I think there's something really special about riding at night. And I think, you know, if you speak to people who are successful 24-hour riders, they all talk about the exhilaration of racing at night. And I think that's what's kept me coming back to the event. I just love that feeling of being on a time trial bike at night, going fast or relatively fast, and on a clear night with the moon out and the kind of chill in the air, and that feeling that everyone else is tucked up in bed and you're kind of, it reminds me of that scene in the BFG where he's kind of running down the street delivering the dreams. You know, you're in this kind of otherworldly place, humming along. It's a really special feeling, and I think, you know, have a go at 24-hour racing basically, because it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm actually going to switch now to, we're having a few questions coming in, and I'll start with Jonathan for this one. It's from Matt Stell, and he's asked, what's the longest ride you would undertake in training for a 24-hour?
I probably wouldn't. Well, if I was not racing and just training, I probably wouldn't do anything longer than about 8 hours. But it has suited me more if I was going to do something similar to that to ride a 12-hour time trial or two in preparation, just because there's the other competition that I've targeted in the past, which is the British Best All-Rounder. Something that's quite interesting that I find when you're training for long distance rides or races is the mental aspect. I think the long rides are more important to prepare your mind than physically, than my body. if I'm not used to doing anything more than an hour or two, and I go out for a 3-hour ride, I get to the end of 3 hours and I'm wishing it was over, and it seems to take forever. Whereas if I'm used to riding 8 hours every day, I'll get to the 3-hour point, and it's not. I don't believe it's a physical difference. I get to the 3-hour point and I feel like I've just got going, and it's putting your head in the right space. I think that's one of the really important things about doing longer rides, and the mental aspect is incredibly important. And you were just asking Mike about his training, and I think that I like the longer races because I've dialed my aerodynamics in on the bike, and if I can get my head in the right place, then I think the longer races, you don't need to be the strongest person in a field, but you can still win a race if you're mentally better prepared than someone else, which is quite different to some of the shorter things.
Yeah, we're actually getting quite a lot of questions coming in. So we've had one here, and this one's specifically for Mike. And Brian Hill, he's asked, how long was it after the end-to-end before you were able to get on a bike again? Did you do a ride the next day to the cafe, for example, or did you just slum it up in John O'Groats for a few days?
Well, yeah, good question, I suppose. No, we finished at about 3:25 in the morning. And as you can imagine, there's not much going on in John O'Groats at 3:25 in the morning. So once we'd kind of had a few cuddles and taken some photos, the poor kind of crew drivers had to then drive us back to Inverness, where we got to Inverness around breakfast time, and we managed to find a hotel which had enough spare rooms to put everyone up. And we then walked into the hotel breakfast, which they told us was an all-you-can-eat breakfast. And we were like, well, I hope you mean that, because there's a lot of seriously hungry people in this group. And so I think we put a pretty good effort in eating all the breakfast that there was in Scotland that day. And then most people went to bed, to be honest, but I was so kind of wired on adrenaline and energy drinks and you name it. I just kind of ended up sitting around in the foyer of the hotel. But then, the next day we drove home, which was the Monday. And then on the Tuesday, I think I had meant to go to work on the Tuesday, but I was just pretty wrecked and ended up going to the doctors. But yes, rode to work on the Wednesday. So that was probably 2-3 days afterwards.
Wow. No, I remember that very well, actually, Mike, because I stayed up to check that you finished because I was really, really excited about it. And I remember you messaging me as if you'd just ridden down to the shops and you were totally coherent just after you'd finished. I thought, wow, this person's just finished his epic record and he's sat there on a chair just talking to me. I couldn't quite work it out myself, but I really remember.
It was very strange. I turned my phone on and I had about 3,000 messages, and there were quite a few people who'd been kind of sending me messages through the event. And it was kind of a weird way of replaying all the emotions that everyone had been through the event. And I think it was probably reading all those messages that then meant I couldn't really go to sleep, because I ended up kind of feeling, just completely all over the place, really, about what all these people had been saying, which was lovely. I mean, I was absolutely blown away by the interest that people had. And as people know as well, it was only then a few weeks later that I raced the national 24 hours. So I suppose I was conscious of trying to, if not train, at least try and get my body into some kind of shape to be able to nurse it round the national 24 hour.
Yeah, and I still don't know how you did that either. But speaking about bikes and perhaps not returning to them too quickly, we've had a question here from Andy Tucker. Now, Andy Tucker's a bit of a celeb in UB Velo, and he's our shining light for long distance cycling. He actually competed in the national 12-hour this year and did an absolutely stonking ride. If he can correct me with the comments, that would be great, because I can't remember what it is. I can remember approximately what it is, but I don't want to say it because I'll get it wrong. But he's become very, very geeky, and he couldn't wait to hear you both tonight. So he's going to shower us with a few questions, I think. But the first question he's asked is actually to John. And I think he's been keeping up to date with all these articles about your bike. It's certainly got a lot of press recently. He says, have you got any plans to change your bike frame? Or as you say, it's just a great aero frame that was years ahead of its time. And that I think that would be interesting to hear. And just explain about the bike you've currently got before you answer that.
I've got a 10-year-old giant time trial bike, a giant Trinity Advanced SL2. It was used to win the World Time Trial Championships the year before Fabian Cancellara won his, so it's a few years old now. And it's obviously the thing that people look at when they see someone break a record. They look at what equipment they're riding, the bike they're riding. But the reality is that you, the rider, are creating the majority of the drag in the air. And there is only so much you can do with a bike frame to make any improvements. And that was already a very fast bike frame. And you're talking about Mike riding the Hemel Club 10 course. I rode that probably in 2013, and I rode it again recently. And off a very similar power output, I was a minute faster now than I was then. Same frame, but the frame's not what's changed. It's the clothing, it's the position on the bike, it's various other things. And it doesn't matter how much I try to explain to people what's important when it comes to going fast in the time trial. They always go, "Oh yeah, but I need the latest this bike and that bike," and it's a small part of the overall package of going fast. So no, I don't feel like the frame's holding me back, and I'm dialed in on it, so I'll keep using it.
It certainly looks very whizzy, and I know you did quite a lot of little modifications to it, and I think if anyone can, Google John Shubert's bike, you'll get some really interesting things that he did to his bike in order to make it go faster. And there's things like gaffer tape that was used in various places on the bike. Just another question from Andy, and this is a semi-maths question to both of you. See what you can remember. What are your PBs for 10, 25, 50 and 100?
Go on, Mike.
Well, these are all quite a long time ago. I think my racing days are long gone. 10 miles, I did 18:56 on the F20, which I take some pride in for having a PB that isn't on the V718. An 18, back when 18s were fairly rare. 25, I think my 25 PB dates from when before some riders were born. But in 2005, I think I did a 50-20 or something like that. 50-17 maybe. 50 miles, I can't remember. 143 maybe or something like that. And then 100 miles, again, a long time ago, a 3:33. Again, back when 3:33s were good. And now, I think when I did 3:33, it was the fastest ride in the country that year, which is an indication of how the game has changed, really. And so that was, that was 14 years ago, 2006. That was the quickest 100 of the year. So yeah, they're my PBs. But like I said, all a long time ago.
Yeah, and I know that when I've been speaking to Mike, and he almost jokes with me about the events I've done, and I always say he's always trying to get me to do these long distance records, and I'm always trying to get Mike to enter a 10-mile TT, but I haven't been able to do that yet. And Jonathan, have you managed to get those brain cells in action?
I think the last 3 seasons, I managed a short 20-minute 10 once or twice. There's a local course this year though that no one had ever gone under 20:30 on it. It was an old record of Richard Preble's when he was national 10 champion, and I managed a 19:46 on there. So that's the first 19 I've done for many years. And I think my 25-mile PBs the last 3 seasons about 54 minutes. But then my 50-mile PB is a 1:37. So I was pleased with that because that was a string of 19-minute 10s back to back. And then later on, I did that year, 2019, I did a 3:19:100, which is 10 19-minute 10s back to back. I just don't go looking for fast 10 or 25 courses, but I do look for fast 50, 100 courses because they're part of the British Best All-Rounder competition.
Yeah, well, I think this is learning all round. Some of the best long distance riders in the country aren't doing these shorter TTs, so I think that's quite an interesting thing to hear. Another question that's come in from Paul Jones, who you might know. He said Shubes, so he's obviously someone that knows you fairly well. When chatting to Alf Engers a few years ago back, he made a really interesting point about Marcin Biala-Blocki, who's now retired, and his mega quick time. And that for a 33-mile-an-hour plus average ride, you're actually riding a lot of the time over that speed. So can you tell us some of the big stretches of speed you had and the feelings you got when you were ploughing along for long bits at these, really, really fast speeds?
Oh, it was bonkers. Absolutely. I think I was averaging about 37, 38 miles an hour for one of the 10-mile stretches in the 100 record I just set. Yeah, and the weirdest thing is when you look at I'm used to in a 100-mile time trial knowing that every mile ticks by in 2 minutes when I'm doing a 30-mile-an-hour average, but the country was just vanishing underneath me. 1 minute I'd look down and I'd done 30 miles, and then I'd look down again and I'd done 40 miles. It was happening so fast. It's an unbelievable experience. Very privileged to have an experience like that, where you've got people out helping you, supporting you to go this fast on a bicycle, and you don't have to turn around and ride back into a headwind. It felt magical. I can't really put it into words. It was like flying.
Yeah, I think most people can relate to that actually, because whatever speed you normally ride, you've always had that feeling of going really, really fast, and it's a really nice feeling. I think to have that for 3 whole hours must have been pretty special. Actually, another question just come in for you, Jonathan, and it's from Greg Mellier. He says, when are you going to take Mike's Land's End John O'Groats record off him?
Well, Mike's encouraging all sorts of people to have a go at it, and I think what's wonderful about these records is it would be boring if you took it and no one else ever did. It's by taking someone else's record, you keep the history alive.
Yeah.
I think this 100 record I've just taken is amazing, because when I get the shield, it's got names and times that date back to 1885 on it.
Wow.
And I think that's a really important part of the RRA. There might be a lull for 10, 20 years in the history, and then technology's moved on and all sorts of things. And even a couple of years ago, when Mike set his record, a lot of things didn't go to plan, and times are getting quicker in time trials. Everyone's getting faster, and it doesn't mean when someone eventually takes Mike's record that they're a better athlete than he is.
Yeah.
But I know Mike is very magnanimous and humble about his record. It was an amazing thing he did, and he'll be the first person there to cheer someone on who does take it. And yeah, I would love to have a go. If someone gave me the opportunity and said I want to sponsor this, then it's an amazing thing to do. I love racing. When I set the record across Oman, 2 days on a bicycle is an adventure like no other thing I've ever experienced. Yeah. So yeah, never say never, but I'm open to all sorts of suggestions for what I might do next.
I think that's what I hear a lot about when we talk about the RRA, and I think a lot of people won't know that much about the RRA, which actually stands for the Road Records Association. And there's a real feeling, if you want to sort of be part of a really inclusive cycling community, you really want to be part of the RRA, because Jonathan was saying there how Mike's being really, really supportive and trying to get other people into it. But Mike, you also had Gethin Butler supporting you on your record, didn't you? And he was the holder of the record at the time. And when you were riding, I think when you came over Shap, he was standing there and cheering you on. Am I right in that? Was he at Shap or was it somewhere else?
No, it was remarkable. It gives me goosebumps just to think about it now. We were riding through the night, and it was probably 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, and we started to kind of come up past Liverpool, basically just slightly further over that way through Warrington, and then you join, I think it's the A49 and then the A6 up through these northern towns. And similar to the experience that John had, really, I was absolutely just bowled over by the number of people who'd come out to the roadside. Every mile or so there'd be another family like coming out at 1 a.m. with their children in onesies to cheer. But I remember seeing this kind of flash of yellow, and then the Preston Wheelers top, and it was Gethin, and he was cheering me on from then, and he cheered me on a few times. And then as I came into Lancaster, there's normally 2 bridges over the river in Lancaster, but one of them was closed, and so there was a contraflow. And Gethin was literally running down the middle of the road, pointing to ensure that I got myself into the correct lane so that I went over the other bridge because of the contraflow. Because he was worried that I was going to go the wrong way. And he had previously phoned my wife, Helen, to explain to her about the contraflow in Lancaster. That's how much he was, determined that we were going to get that section of the journey right. And then, as you say, he then followed us all the way up to Shap Summit. And so a lot of people have seen the photos of me climbing Shap and coming up through the mist. And there's actually a really, really great video that Pete Roughhead took, the chap who runs Arctic. And I just love it. I'm riding up out of the mist, and then someone says, how are you feeling? And I just say something. I feel like I'm absolutely on top of the world. It's just this amazing experience. And I catch eyes with Gethin. And I think all I say to him is just thank you so much. Because him being there just meant so much to me. And as you say, really, just that kind of community feel. And it still takes my breath away that people would even consider mentioning me in the same breath as him and Andy Wilkinson and John Woodburn and Dick Poole and all those people that have gone before. Really, it's very surreal.
But that's just the kind of thing. Perhaps, Mike, you could just talk a little more about the RRA, because there's a lot of people listening and far outside Newby Velo as well. And maybe just give a little introduction about what they are. A very, very brief history. So we've got a lot of questions to get through. And I know you'd like to get a lot of ladies trying for records as well. So perhaps you could just give us sort of a potted history and why it's such a special organisation, and how people could get involved with it if they wanted to.
Yeah, well, I suppose inspired by how helpful they were to me when I was trying to undertake the record, I've got to know the people who are involved and realised it is a very special organisation. It had a period where perhaps it hadn't been as popular as it had once been, and I think I probably felt that having seen the popularity of my own attempt and also a couple of others that Doug Hart and Nick Clark did in 2018, I saw that perhaps there was a good match between the RRA and things like social media, as you described, people following these attempts online. And so I volunteered myself to join the RRA committee, where I've learned a lot about the organisation and also been really, really excited about the positive energy that's surrounded every single attempt that's gone on so far. I mean, the organisation dates right back to the 1880s, 1890s, when it broke away from what became effectively what became British cycling, because they no longer wanted to maintain these records that people had talked about. And so it was an organisation that initially only had 4 or 5 records on its books, and has developed now to have probably 20, 25 different records that are available for men and women. And in the past, they've appealed to the best cyclists of the day. And so, as Jonathan alluded to earlier, all of these records have got a very illustrious past of the very best riders of the era kind of seeking to get their names on these shields. And I think my concern was I didn't want our generation to be the generation where that finally faded out. And I really hope that the PR that I do and the kind of promotion that I do, and I've been very open in saying that, if anyone's interested in getting involved in these records, then they just have to kind of contact me. And it's my pleasure to really help people with the paperwork or help them with the routes and help them with the scheduling, all the bits and pieces that can make it appear quite tricky or inaccessible. They're not. You just need to know the right way to approach it. And I get so much interest and excitement out of watching people going for these records. And as you've seen, and as lots of people have seen, we've now introduced these RRA red caps. So presenting them to the best riders of the current generation has been an enormous privilege. But then also I've been lucky enough to go back and visit so many great record holders from the past and present them with caps as well. And it's just given me these amazing experiences that have just kind of allowed me to meet these great characters and these great racers and listen to their stories. And what I really want to do is make sure that rich history has a kind of a way of continuing on into the future, because you can't ever replace history. You can only build upon it and make sure that it carries on. having people like Jonathan and then this year people like Chris Gibbard and people like Adam Wilde taking on these records and pushing them into new areas is just brilliant. I love seeing the best riders, but as you alluded to, we get lots and lots of men going for records, and I really want lots of women to feel that they can step up and have a go at them as well.
Yeah, and I think I had a look myself at the records. You can just go onto the RRA website and have a look, and there's a fair few gaps actually with the records that haven't been attempted. So I'd say go and look them up and see if there's any you fancy doing, because there's some really obscure routes you can do. You can do the straight out record like Jonathan did with his 100, or you can do circuits of places. You can do sort of end-to-end rides like Land's End to John O'Groats. There's a real variety, and I think they'll appeal to everyone. You know, the straight fast rides, they appeal to people who just like going fast, like Jonathan. But then you get other ones which are pretty lumpy courses or really suit hill climbers. So there's a real variety, and I'd encourage anyone who's listening today to just go and look at the website. It's a very basic website, but it's got a lot of really interesting information on, and just go and have a look and see what you'd like to get stuck into. Another question here was asked quite a while ago from Tim Cook. I think you're both teachers. Now, I know Mike's a current teacher, and I know Jonathan has been a teacher. So 2 questions for both of you. What do your students know and think about what you've done? And how did you manage to get time away from the classroom to do your record-breaking rides? I'd start with Jonathan, because he's been a bit quiet for a while.
Yeah, well, when I was preparing for my world record across Oman, that was a real undertaking, because the idea behind it was to raise money for a group of victims of conflict in northern Iraq. And there was an awful lot of red tape. Where I lived in the Middle East, they were concerned that any fundraising was either going to be funding terrorism, or you were trying to keep the money for yourself. So I had difficulty dealing with the government. I was contacting the body in America who were going to make it an official world record. And then I had to train, which was taking up all day on a Friday and Saturday, which were my weekends in Oman, just trying to hold down a full-time job at the same time. And I didn't really have a life for a few months. And it was quite a bizarre experience, and I wasn't given any time off by the school, so I had to do it in the holidays, so I couldn't wait for the weather like Mike did. And I do remember setting the record and everyone getting quite excited at the school, because there's a lovely video. If you type in Shubert Oman in YouTube, you'll see a documentary that a film crew came from Kuwait to film. So it got lots of publicity. The students really liked it, but I do remember having a parents' evening and a mother sitting down with me and saying, "Oh, congratulations on setting your record, but I'm not happy about the time you've taken off work to do this, because you've missed my daughter's lessons." And I said, I did that in my own time in the holidays. She never apologized. I don't know where she got that idea from, but it was all consuming doing something like that. And that's why I think I would shy away from the end-to-end. Doing the 100 I've just done was quite simple, really. You're just going for a 3-hour bike ride. You carry all your own food. It's not too much of an undertaking. But unless you've actually done something like what Mike did with the end-to-end, and I supported Chris Murray this summer when she went for an end-to-end attempt. It is literally a military operation to get for 2 days to have all your timekeepers and your support with you. It's a massive thing. So yeah, it's possible if you want it enough. And yeah, as Mike says, building the commute into it is...
Okay, we're having a few technical issues at the moment. Mike, can you hear me? Oh, he's coming back.
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear, Rachel. It's all fine here. Seems to be that Rachel's gone missing.
Okay, well, I can hear you, Mike. You're still there.
I think I might need to step in as the interviewer here, Jonathan.
Well, we can bounce questions off one another.
I'll answer the question that we just had about my school, and then I'll think of something nice to ask you. If people are still listening, or maybe now Rachel's disappeared, they'll disappear as well. In answer to the question about school, I managed to decide to change. I taught at the same school for 17 years, and then when I decided I was going for the end-to-end.
Okay, I'm refreshing mine.
When I decided to go for the end-to-end, I also, just to complicate things, decided that it might be time to change schools. So when I went for the interview at the new school and they said at the end of the interview, do you have any other questions? I said, yeah, I'm only prepared to take the job if you guarantee me that at 3 days' notice, I can have 5 days off to go and ride the length of the country. But fortunately, they said yes to that, which was good news. So I was pretty pleased about it. The school have been very supportive, but I suppose I haven't asked them any really difficult questions yet. They gave me another day off during the last academic year so that I could go and ride the World Championships 24 in California, which was very kind. But I hope that I'm able to kind of repay them for that gratitude in terms of, providing positive publicity, and then also, I hope sharing some of my experiences with the children at school. They seem very interested. I try not to, go on about it too much, but I think they're gently proud of what I've done.
And from what I understand, Mike, when you had set the record, you went back to school and there was a guard of honor of all the boys in the school, and you came in and were presented with a bottle of champagne by the headmaster, and they framed your jersey in the sports hall. Is that something along those lines? So it's something to inspire all those students.
Yeah, no, to be fair, that was really, really nice. It was, as I said earlier, I had told them that I was going to go into work on the Tuesday, and then basically Helen had said to me, look, there's no way you can go to work today. You just need to recover. And so we were walking around town just feeling a bit shell-shocked, and my mobile phone went off and it was school. And I was thinking, oh no, they're going to be cross with me. They're going to be telling me off that I should be in work. And they said, as you described, they said, we're so pleased that you've done this. We want to lay on a guard of honor. And so they cancelled lessons for an hour and got the whole school out in the middle. And they invited the whole support crew down and people from the RRA. And they put on a spread and they made a cake. And as you said, they presented me with a bottle of champagne. And what was really nice was it provided a good opportunity for us to get closure on the event, because we had all been so tired after finishing the previous weekend that everyone had just kind of gone home, and actually all coming back together once we'd slept, and gave us an opportunity to catch up, and we went for a pub lunch together, and it was just a really special moment. And without wanting to blow my own trumpet, a lot of the boys that were there said to me afterwards that they'd really enjoyed the event, and that they had felt inspired. So that was lovely.
No, I think that's really good, because often schools will get in a sports star, an Olympian to talk. But I think when it's somebody that you're so close to, it has a really inspirational effect. And I'm sure those boys, even if they grow up absolutely hating cycling, they'll remember that for the rest of their lives. And I'm sure it will give them some inspiration, even if it doesn't encourage them to ride a bike. It'll encourage them to get a bit of grit and look up to someone. I've incidentally, Mike, Greg Melia, I should apologise for calling him Greg Melia earlier. He said, now you've done the 24, now you need to go back and knock 17 seconds off the 25. So that's your next challenge. Next question. We've got a lady in the club called Hannah Green. She's only recently got into cycling. She actually does a lot with the club. And she's really, really enjoying it. And her next challenge is to complete a 100-mile ride. And she'd just like to know from both of you what your top tips would be to just complete that ride. It's going to be a pretty big achievement for her. So good luck, Hannah.
My top tip be interesting to hear what Jonathan says as well, but my top tip would definitely be make sure that you start eating and drinking right from the start of a ride. I think when people are used to just doing short rides, you will just wait till you get to a cafe, or perhaps just wait till you get home. Whereas actually, if you want to ride for 100 miles, not 100 hours, 100 miles, okay, then in all reality, you're probably going to be out on the road for 5 or 6 hours. And if you bonk, then it's basically too late. So you need to make sure that you've got small, easy to eat bits of food in your pockets and good energy drinks on your bike, and just start eating and drinking in the first 20 minutes, even if you don't feel that hungry or thirsty. Honestly, correct nutrition is just the key to all of these long rides. You know, when people say, oh, how do you ride 150 miles or 200 miles or anything like that? If you get the eating and drinking right, you're 90% of the way there. That's what makes the biggest difference. And so for this long ride, that's absolutely fabulous to hear that she's planning it. But yeah, just get the jelly babies in your pocket and get your kind of dried fruit and your nuts. And then, you know, a couple of good 750ml bottles of energy drink. And then I'd say probably a couple of, you know, a sachet or two of energy powder so you can stop at a garage and mix up another couple of bottles. And that way she'll fly around. Brilliant. Best of luck.
You got any more tips, Jonathan?
I think a large part of the reason that there's been so much interest in the 100-mile record that I've just set is because it's something that in some way or other every cyclist can relate to. You know, everyone I've spoken to remembers the first time they rode 100 miles. This will be a monumental thing in your life that will live with you till the day you die. And everyone has a benchmark. Everyone knows how fast they've ridden 100 miles. And absolutely, you can do what Mike said, and you can get your nutrition right. But then at the same time, Mike and I have a friend who lives in Oman called Dan, whose first 100 miles was done on 20 pints of beer and 3 packets of crisps. And it's the most memorable thing that he has to talk about. So I think as it's such a monumental thing to do, make sure it's an adventure. Make sure you pick a good route, somewhere that's enjoyable, beautiful scenery. And then however fast or slowly you do it, I wouldn't worry about that too much. You've got a benchmark and something to work on next time.
That's great advice. And my own advice would be to just reward yourself afterwards and imagine something that you'd really like. If it's a special meal or a chocolate cake that you've denied yourself for months if you've been training. I wouldn't encourage that, by the way. I eat far too much cake. But if you've got something to look forward to, you can think about that during your ride and have it to look forward to. But I've never actually ridden 100 miles, so what do I know? I think I've done 99.97 at one point, but that's as far as I go. I know Mike's trying to get me to do a few of these records on the tandem, but I'll need a bit more persuading yet to do the anything over 50 miles. Speaking of challenges, we've got a question here from Graham Stent. Now, Graham, I know fairly well from running, but he's got into cycling pretty seriously recently, and he's someone who's can turn his hand to anything and do pretty well at it, and that includes jumping around backwards on bikes as well as climbing up hills pretty quickly. But his question is for both of you, and he says, do either of you have any more big challenges in the pipeline apart from that 17 seconds off the 25, Mike?
I'll let Jonathan go first.
I think I'm about to start a new job for quite a well-known cycling television channel. So I think a lot of the challenges that I might be doing might not be my personal choice. I'm just going to be doing what I'm told to do. But anything that's new and anything that's an adventure, I'd love to turn my hand to at least once.
And Mike, are you going to reveal, or are you going to play?
Well, I've got a couple of things lined up. I think I've got a particular RRA record that I've got my eye on for this spring, if I can get into good shape. And then I think my plan will probably be to build off the back of that and have another go at the National 24-hour, mainly because I can't really imagine a year without riding it, especially having missed it this year because it didn't happen. I feel a bit compromised because the organisers are trying to convince me to help with logistics behind the organisation and to help with the, on the spot timing and stuff like that. But it's quite hard to do that from your time trial bike. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to combine the two roles of both riding it and also helping with the results. But we'll see if we can manage that. And then I think probably the year after next, I would like to experiment with something a bit longer. Got my eye on having a go at a bike packing event, but I would like to, make sure that if I do it properly. So I need to spend time getting the equipment right and speaking to the right people and learning from them. because if I'm going to do it, I need to ensure that I get the performance out of it that the time commitment would kind of suggest that I need to produce. And obviously with a family and, you know, with my wife working very hard and children and so on, if I'm going to take a week out from my real life, I need to be sure that that's what I want to do. But I think at the moment when I'm training, that's what I've got in my mind, those three goals really. So yeah, I've got an RRA record, and then hopefully the 24, and then hopefully after that, something bigger.
That's interesting. One day you'll be interested in the VTTA, which is the Veterans Time Trials Association. You can go for some of their records as well. But I know you don't feel old yet, Mike, so you don't feel quite ready for that yet. Actually, I've got a question. It's a fairly practical question. It's obviously from somebody who probably fancies a go at some of these records. It's David Hanson. And he said, for these record attempts, do you have to notify the various authorities that they are taking place, rather like police notifications that a lot of time trialers are aware of? Also, this one's for Jonathan. How did you decide on the route that you were going to do? And was it all dual carriageway or a mix of dual and single roads? So maybe, Mike, if you could start with the practical aspects of that and notifications, and then we'll move on to Jonathan, who can talk about his route for his 100 miles.
Yeah, basically, if you want to have a go at an RRA record, although there's a little bit of a reputation that the paperwork is slightly intimidating, I think you'll find that the people who kind of are the organisers of the RRA will be tripping over themselves to try and help you. I think once you've decided on something that interests you, if you contact Brian Edrupt, who's the records secretary, the first thing he'll do is issue you with an attempt number. And these are quite cool anyway, because they date back literally to 1880 with attempt number 1. And they're currently, Jonathan will probably know, I think Jonathan's attempt was number 2,149 or something like that. And so every single attempt in history has a number, and they just keep going up. And I guess your goal is to try and transform your attempt number into a record number, because the record numbers are only on about 900. But once you've got an attempt number, then you have 2 documents to fill in called the notice and the schedule. So the notice is basically who you are, which club you ride for, which record you're going for, and who your timekeeper will be and who your observer will be. And you fill that in. And then also your schedule basically details what time of day you're going to start, and then which route you're going to follow, along with approximate times on where you anticipate being at the intermediate points. And you take these 2 documents and you post them back to Brian, and then basically you sit and wait until you get the weather window that you're looking for. And that's basically how it works. And so kind of once you've sent those documents in, Brian needs 48 hours notice for when you actually intend to start. So it becomes a case of watching the forecasts, watching the websites, and then when you're ready, and it's a pretty tricky, stressful decision, you have to kind of phone Brian and give him the green light, and then off you go. And you and your timekeeper and your observer and your support crew all meet at the designated start point an hour before you're going to kick off. And it feels, I don't know what Jonathan said, it feels fairly similar to a normal time trial, really, except that you're the only person playing the game.
I will add to what Mike said. I think there's a difference between some of the RRA records you attempt. So the way I understand it for Land's End on a boat, Mike knows he's going to average close to 20 miles an hour. You're heading through large cities, Exeter and Bristol, and you want to be passing through there when the traffic's not too heavy. And also you don't want to be riding through 2 nights if you can help it. You want to ride through 1. So ideally you would schedule your start to be early in the morning on the first day that you set off. Whereas it was much harder for me to pin down the time that I wanted to start my 100-mile record, because you're writing a schedule a month or so in advance. You don't know what the weather's going to do. And if you put a schedule in for 9 o'clock in the morning, and the day comes around when there's a big wind, and the big wind starts at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and there's nothing at 9 o'clock in the morning, you're finished by the time the winds arrive. So what I learned that Ian Camish did, who had the 25 record, the 50 record, and the 100 record, he had the 100 record before I took it from him in 1993. He was sponsored by Rally Bicycles, and they were paying for all his schedules and his attempts. So at one time he would have 50 schedules in, so that he could choose when the weather arrived that he was looking for. He said, the best time to go is going to be at 11 o'clock in the morning. So that's my schedule number, whatever it is, 1982. So what I did was I had about 4 different schedules in that covered a bit of a spectrum of the day. And then I could, when the weather did arrive, as it did, then I could choose which one I wanted to take, because you couldn't adjust that start time.
That's interesting. And regarding planning your route? Yeah,
I think that was probably more of a question for Mike, because he was the one who came up with the majority of it. I know 2 of my teammates, Tim Bailey and Nick Clark, have the side-to-side records across Britain on solo and on the tandem, and they used the majority of the course that I did for the 100 in their record attempts, and they knew that was a very fast stretch of road. It joined up 2 and a little bit of the fast time trial courses in Britain that we are familiar with and we regularly use in the south, and it's all in a similar trajectory. So that was suggested to me, and it wasn't all on dual carriageway. There was, I'm not sure, maybe about 15 miles that was single carriageway, and it was an uphill drag. That was the hardest part. And somewhere, because I'd broken the record on the 21st of October, I knew it was more of a reconnaissance ride than a record-breaking ride when I rode it, and I knew that was going to be the toughest bit. So that was where I intended, and I did. When I went under 3 hours, I tried a lot harder, and I think I went about 2 minutes quicker over that section of 10 miles.
Wow. Yeah, you knocked out we banged out some pretty quick 10 miles when you're doing your ride. I've got another question coming for you, John, and this is from Paul Jackson, and I know Paul's no stranger to long distance riding himself. He's actually said, when he crossed Oman, did you sleep at all, or did you just go straight out for 47 plus hours?
Crossing Oman required probably the most resilience that I've ever had when I've raced a bike, because I had food poisoning the night before. I'd eaten some rice cakes that had gone off cheese in them, so I was suffering from severe diarrhea, and I was heading out into the deserts, 42-degree heat. About 6 hours in, I had such severe heat stroke that I was lying on the ground, convulsing. I couldn't speak properly. It sounded like I was having a stroke because the muscles around my mouth were unable to move properly, and everyone thought I was finished. And it was like I was saying to you earlier, in my mind, I need to get to the end. There's too many people counting on me. This is going to slow me down, but what's the quickest way I can get there? And I'd been on the ground for an hour, and they thought, well, we need to get him to a hospital now. And I just stood up, climbed on my bike, and rode off. And to me, I didn't see anything strange about that, but to everyone watching, they thought, what on earth is going on? And so I was suffering with, I think the heat stroke was brought on by the fact I was already severely dehydrated, and it did take me, it slowed me down a lot. I was having severe gastric distress. My stomach was really swollen. And because of the exhaustion, if you had food poisoning like that, you would be, laid up in bed for a day or two anyway. But I was trying to cycle 850 miles or something close to that. Maybe it wasn't quite that far, almost 800 miles. And so I had a few hours sleep. And the second day I felt so much better. I felt amazing. But my body fat dropped from 16% when I started to 8% by the time I'd finished 2 days later. Wow. So if I had carried on cycling like that for another day, I was just drinking liquids with energy in, not much else. So because of the circumstances I was in, and then the second day, the temperature reached 42 degrees Celsius, and I was working with Nigel Mitchell, who was the nutritionist for Team Sky and British Cycling, and he'd given me lots of tricks, putting ice cubes in tights down the back of my skin suit to cool the blood flow to my brain, using alcohol sprays because they have a better latent heat capacity to cool me down. But even that was struggling to deal with the temperatures. So I was taking 10 minutes off the bike for everyone to throw wet towels on me, cool me down, 30 minutes easy pedaling. And I kept repeating that through the hottest hours of the day on the second day. So there was definitely a lot of room for improvement in that record. But I think considering the adversity I had in a number of different respects, then I did well to get there in under 2 days, to cross the country in under 2 days. And it was one of the strangest experiences I've also had, because I was in so much discomfort and so much pain, but I was able to somehow take that and put it somewhere to the back of my mind and almost ignore it as though it wasn't there. The cause was too important. The money I was raising for these people, I had a film crew out. This was my one shot at it. And I think that was a real demonstration of mind over matter, and the power in the long distance events of the brain, even if you're in a physically bad or very poor state.
I think that's very similar to what Mike discussed right at the beginning of this discussion. And I've got a question coming now from Paul Jones, and this is actually to Mike. And he says, can you tell us something about the end-to-end community? I know you've alluded to this a bit. He says, I'm lucky enough to have met many of them, and there are some pretty inspirational people out there, but he'd like to know who really stands out for you.
Well,
many to mention, I'm sure, but
no, I mean, so just to kind of fill everyone in, Paul is a fantastic cyclist himself, very proficient racer, and he's the writer of a couple of brilliant cycling books that people have probably, or I hope, have read. One on the National Hill Climb called A Corinthian Endeavour, and another one all about Alf Engers, I think called 14 Lessons from Alf Engers.
I love Alf.
Yeah, I love Alf, that's right, yeah. And he's now writing, or has written, a book about the end-to-end record, which will be published in the spring, which he's really excited about. And he came with us on our attempt for some of the journey, which was really nice. And he's been hugely supportive of everything I've done. And he actually rode the end-to-end himself as part of his research. And I went out and rode with him for about 100 miles, I think, from Devon up to Bristol, which was really good fun. He alludes to the end-to-end community. And one of the things that I told you about earlier was this kind of introduction of the red caps as a way of connecting the modern riders to the riders from the past. And so making these red caps and then going to present them has been an opportunity for me to engage with other members of the end-to-end community. And, you know, there are so many standout characters. I really can't pick anyone. I mean, you know, each of these people has been on this journey, and when you listen to their stories, you can't fail to be wowed by them. One of my standout memories of my time trialing career was, I mean, I call it a career, time trialing, you know, whatever. Anyway, way back, you know, in 2006, I think I felt like I'd hit the peak of my cycling when I finally was a member of a team that won the British Bristol Rounder, and we got invited to Champions Night, and I was stood in the queue to go on stage to collect my medal and my certificate. And I overheard a conversation between Gethin Butler, who was at the time the end-to-end holder, and then also Eileen Sheridan, who is undoubtedly one of the most remarkable cyclists that this country's ever seen. And she was the end-to-end record holder from 1953 until 1990. And they were talking about the end-to-end, and I just stood there listening to their stories. And what I didn't realise was that the MC for the whole event had called my name out, and I was supposed to be on stage collecting my medal and my certificate. And everyone looked a bit sheepish, and my wife felt dreadfully embarrassed because I never turned up. But I still look back at that moment and can't believe that really listening to their stories inspired me to go on and try and join their club. I mean, Eileen I spoke to Eileen recently on her birthday, and she wouldn't forgive me for telling you, but I'm going to anyway. It was her 97th birthday, and she still takes an enormously keen interest in every single RRA attempt. And I phoned her before Christina Murray's attempt, and I phoned her directly afterwards. And I know that she phoned Christina and wished her the very best of luck. And some of you will know I've recorded interviews with some of these people, and I intend to record more interviews in the future. I've got some really interesting ones lined up. But again, it's really nice to have the opportunity to just allow these people to tell their stories and to tell, allow their memories to be recorded, really. Because I think what Paul will allude to in his book is the similarity of the journeys that these people have made. And if you imagine Eileen riding up Shap in 1953, and if you imagine Dick Poole riding up Shap in 1966, and then John Woodburn in 1982, and then Gethin Butler in 2001, and Lynn Biddulph or Lynn Taylor at the time in 2001, just a day after Gethin, all of these people are undertaking the same journey, and they're just separated by time, really. And that's a kind of very poetic narrative. I like it.
I mean, certainly for me, I've been lucky enough to hear Eileen talk myself, and she's an absolutely amazing lady, and she's got a really good book. You probably know the title of it, Mike. I can't remember the title of it, but it's a great book that
Eileen's book is called Wonder Wheels.
Yeah, Wonder Wheels. It's a great read, and certainly now, if you go on that RRA website and look at the list of records, you'll see Eileen's name there an awful lot, and it dates back far before 1950s, if I recall that correctly.
In 2019, Christina Murray broke Eileen's Edinburgh to York record, and she did that. And in saying this, I don't mean any disrespect to Christina at all. I know her very well, and I have the utmost respect for her as an athlete. She's a fabulous athlete, but she did that record on a fully spec'd Scott time trial bike with a great support crew and lots of preparation. And she only knocked, I think, 17 minutes off Eileen's record in a 9.5 hour ride. And for most of that ride, she was behind Eileen's schedule. And she climbed off, and she just texted me within 20 minutes and said she was absolutely astounded by what Eileen was doing in the 50s. The lady's an absolute machine. It's incredible.
Certainly someone who inspires me. I mean, a lot of her stories as well. I think a lot of the training she got was actually delivering messages during the war. She was riding at night on a bike with no lights, incredible distances. And I think it's that sort of guts and determination that she's got. And I think a lot of other people can relate to. We looked at Hannah earlier about her 100-mile ride. When the tough really starts to hit, anyone can sort of install this feeling. You can really get through it if you put your mind to it. But Eileen is an absolutely incredible lady. And if you ever get a chance to speak to her, or anyone who's listening to this, then I advise that you do. I'm aware that we've been going on quite a number of minutes now. There is one question I'd like to ask, because it's come from Ian Greenstreet, and I know he won't be too happy if I don't ask it. And this is to Jonathan. He wants to know how much your chain actually cost you in seconds.
I don't know exactly. I mean, having to stop from a speed of close to 40 miles an hour, and then the time, it wasn't just off. I could have got it back on. It was tangled, so I had to untangle it and then get back up to speed. I imagine it was I think it was close to a minute.
I think I've lost.
Is this where we need to step in again because Rachel's gone quiet? I'm not quite sure.
Could well be. I'll add to what you were saying before, Mike, about how my insight into the end-to-end, my perspective, and I think the end-to-end is absolutely the blue ribbon event of the RRA, and the backbone that has held it together since the organisation together since 1888. Because there are these lulls where people aren't going for records because they've been put so high on the shelf. But everyone always goes back. It doesn't matter whether you're a cyclist or not. The length of the country, the end-to-end, and when someone like yourself breaks a record like that, I think it breathes life back in. Obviously, you've done a huge amount yourself, but we go through these peaks and troughs. And going along to help Chris Murray, I think you and I were both somewhere up in the Midlands at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm not even sure what time it was, and you have all these legends of the RA you talk about who are coming out in their red caps, and it was like being in the Twilight Zone, because I'm in a lay-by in the middle of nowhere, and there's John Taylor, and there's someone who's broken this record in 1960. And these people who I've never seen in my life, and it brings the whole cycling community from Britain together, the end to end, because you see people like Paul Jones, who we've just had a couple of messages from, coming out in Bristol. And then you've got people like Ben Lane, who came out and saw you when you were further north, getting up towards Scotland. And I mean, those are just a couple. There are thousands of people who come out, and it's something that everyone can relate to. And we had issues with Chris Murray's route because of a big road closure and traffic. And everyone wants to help and support, like you were talking about, Gethin, trying to help you with your route. People are coming out and pulling maps out their local knowledge and saying, this is how we can manage this problem. This is the way you want to go. And it was just an amazing, although unfortunately Chris didn't make it this time, it was such an adventure for everyone involved, and just so heartwarming to see the cycling community pull together like that and everyone will her on to break it. I think it's a magical thing. And yeah, just if you get the chance, anyone who's listening to this, to go along and support on an end-to-end, it'll be one of the most memorable things you ever do.
Yes, I think tonight at Newby Velo we're going to commit. So if any of our members want to go and give it a go, we'll give anyone the support that they need to go and do that. So if you don't feel like turning the pedals yourself, this support aspect is obviously such an integral part of all these records. And I'm certainly inspired to go and support one. I shouldn't really mention that myself and Ian Greenstreet on tandem are thinking of one next year, but we're not going to say too much about that because Mike will start encouraging me to do silly long distances. We're going to start small. But just listening to you guys tonight, it's absolutely incredible to hear. And I think it certainly inspired me to get more involved in RRA, and this real sense of community and belonging is incredible. Just to finish up, I'm going to put you two in the panel, the question asking seat, just for a second. So Mike, I'd like you to ask Jonathan any question you'd like at all that you'd like to know about Jonathan. And try and keep it cycling related.
I suppose, yeah. One of the things that strikes, I mean, I've known Jonathan for a long time, and it's been interesting to watch his cycling journey. And I know that he's someone who's often looking for the kind of next piece of motivation or the next stimulus to go on and find what his next target is. And I suppose I think I have always felt really lucky to be part of the team that I'm in, and I'd love to hear him say kind of how he feels that being part of Arctic has affected his cycling, because when he joined Arctic, which is now 4 or 5 years ago, I wonder what he thought was going to happen and how that compares to how it's actually panned out the last 4 or 5 years.
When I'd cycled around the world, that was such an achievement, something I never thought I would ever fulfill in my life. Very few people do. It was so enriching and rewarding. 3 weeks after that, I won the national 24-hour time trial. I just become a national time trial champion, and I was so contented. I thought, I've been riding and training for all these years on my bike, and I've missed out on other opportunities because I put that first. So I went and spent the next couple of years enjoying other things and not riding my bike much. And then Mike got in touch and said, we want to break the team record. And there was some conflict of interest because I had quite a close relationship with the High Wycombe Cycling Club, and particularly the president, Dr. Gordon Wright, who's a very renowned coach in the cycling world, coached Nicole Cook to her Olympic gold medal in 2008. So I had to propose it to him. I said, how do you feel about me attacking some team records with a different team? And actually they were incredibly supportive, and it breathed life back into me. I didn't realize how much I'd missed the cycling, and having, cycling can be quite an individual sport, a solo sport, but having a team around you where you've got common goals is just so motivating for me, because I had no ambition to go back and ride the 24-hour again. But this was different. I wasn't trying to win it. I was trying to, with Mike and Tim Bailey, I was trying to set a new record. And the amount that I'd learned from the experience, the wisdom, the knowledge of having these teammates who've been around the sport for a long time, and just as one of us learns a new aero trick, we pass it on to everyone else. That has led me to things that I had never even dreamed of. In 2019, I had 6 weeks where I almost didn't ride a bike in the middle of the season, and then one of my teammates, Nick Clark, was saying they needed a third man for the British Best All-Rounder competition, twisting my arm just to roll round, and I ended up winning the competition. So without that motivation, that support, it's given me so much, and it's great to share that with some like-minded individuals who can enjoy your successes, and you can share those successes. So yeah, being part of a team is brilliant, and I think without the pressure, which is what Arctic is like, it's it's nice to all group together on things, but if you don't have the time or the motivation, then that's absolutely not the end of the world. You're not being forced into anything. It's a great. I'm very, very lucky to have been for the last few years a part of the Arctic, and having a teammate like Mike as well has been instrumental. I wouldn't have done ridden this RRA 100 record if it hadn't been for Mike and his persuasion.
And I think if you go to the Cycling Time Trials handbook, you'll see that there are an awful lot of Arctic records in there. So it's a really well-known team in terms of long distance time trialing. Now, just to finish, Jonathan, you're now in the interviewing seat. What would you like to ask Mike? What one thing would you like to know that you've never asked before?
Well, there's always a question that people ask me about Mike, and I'm sure he gets asked it a lot. So if Mike didn't have a job as the head of maths at an illustrious boys' school, and he didn't have 4 children, and he was a full-time athlete without all these other commitments, just how far could he go in 24 hours? And how quickly could he do Land's End to John O'Groats?
I feel like the answer that I'm going to give is a kind of, wishy-washy soft answer, but I don't want to be that person that you describe, because the things that I do make me who I am, and I don't want to. I wouldn't be who I am without my family, and I wouldn't be who I am without my job and my happiness in my career. And it's interesting because I know a few people who've tried to make it as professional cyclists over the years, really. I remember Stuart Shawcross a long time ago trying to give up his job and become a professional, like full-time time trialist. And I know kids who've ridden track and become time trialists. And I know Alex Dowsett fairly well, and I've watched his career. And it's a very, very strange pressure when you're racing and that's all you've got, because suddenly you don't have the pressure of time, but you've got plenty of other pressures. And I've always felt very fortunate to have racing as a hobby rather than as something I have to do. And actually, it's very beneficial to be able to just walk away from it sometimes and come back to it when you want to. And actually, I don't think that my job or my family is the limiting factor on what I've done. And in many cases, it's inspired me to go on and do stuff. I mean, as I described earlier, my wife was instrumental in me completing the end-to-end, and my family and friends are definitely instrumental on every decent ride I've done. And as well, John, you came out when I cycled with my 2 lads from Berkhamsted, where I live, to Wales. And I would honestly describe that as one of my best cycling achievements. It was certainly one of the most enjoyable 3 days I've had on a bike, and something I'm most proud of. In terms of what I think is achievable on a bike, I've run the numbers. The end-to-end, the end-to-end is a funny beast, because it's all very well to say what could you do on a perfect ride, but it's such a long period of time that I think the probability of getting a perfect ride is pretty close to 0. Something will go wrong, and it's how you cope with that. I think probably the nearest that anyone, I think John Woodburn had a fairly good set of conditions and a fairly good ride, and he put a fairly high barrier, a fairly strong marker down. And I think the men's tandem that rode in 2015 had a very good day and a very good ride. But I think pretty much every other ride has faced some challenges. I think if it had all gone well, and I look at what we did get, which was 43.25, if it had all gone perfectly, I think I could have got close to 42 hours. I think that's doable. And I think someone who's better than me will definitely go under 42 hours, which would be nice because it's 20 miles an hour. So to average 20 miles an hour over the length of the country will be a fine achievement. In terms of 24 hours, I don't know. I feel like, Christoph Strasser has ridden 5:55, I think. And that's been beaten by people on solo attempts recently on more favourable courses. I think people are riding close to 5:60 on kind of solo attempts on favourable courses. I think the Mersey course, which is all we have in the UK now, will always present particular challenges. But Graham Kemp produced a fantastic ride last year. It was a fantastic ride, but it was also a very good day. And he rode 5:44, I think. I suspect, Andy, unfortunately had an accident that day, would have been close to that. And I think people on that day could have ridden 5:50. But in America on the Borrego course, I think that's faster for the right rider. They could ride 5:75, 5:80. But then the thing is, I'm talking about all of this, and then as you know yourself, someone comes along like Joe Skipper and they just kind of raise the bar a whole nother level. And as he's done at 12 hours, if you look back in time, for so long, 300 miles was a barrier in 12 hours. And you could count the number of people who'd ridden 300 miles on one hand. And then suddenly, Joe's just blowing that out of the water, talking about riding 3:30. So one day, genuinely, and I suspect, it wouldn't surprise me if it's in the next 10 years, someone probably in Borrego will ride 600 miles. So, like all time trials, everything just gets faster and faster.
And I love the way you say someone better than me, Mike. I think in a 10-mile time trial, you can equate being better with the power you put out or how good you are aerobically, what your VO2 max, but there's a whole realm of better. And currently there's nobody better than you. And it will take a very, very special person to achieve this better status. And it's a whole realm of things. As I say, it's not just power. It's about mental strength and having that support team. So you have to look at it in a multifaceted aspect rather than, you're going to correct me on that because it's a mathematical term. But I think to actually get someone who is better than you will be very, very hard.
I think, so can I step in? I think it's interesting. I mean, any athlete, maybe if you're mathematically minded as well, you do a lot of assessment of what you've done and how good it is and where it's gone wrong and things like that. And what you said is very nice, but it's not true. Like I've ridden the 24-hour. I mean, I'll discount the one after the end-to-end because I was in a bit of a pickle after that. But last year, Graham Kemp on his debut was far better than me, and I watched him ride away from me in the night, and I couldn't do anything about it. Now, I knew in my mind that I wasn't as fit as I could have been, but he was far, far better than me. And people will always come along who are better than you. And I think, to be honest, I think it's like what John said earlier. People will always come along and go faster doing records, and that's part of the game. You've got to enjoy it. You've got to not get hung up on it, and you've got to derive pleasure from seeing people push you and push themselves and be pushed by you. And I thought it was really interesting riding last year's 24-hour because when the start sheet came out, it was incredible, and I remember talking to Adam Wild's dad, who runs Spin Data, and I said to him, I felt so intimidated. I logged on and he'd predicted that I was only going to come 9th in the 24-hour. And it's easy for people to think that, it's Mike, he won't get rattled. But I was really rattled by that. And I looked at all the people and I thought, you know what, maybe they're right. Maybe it's not going to happen. And then to ride with these people and to come second in that field and to watch Graham produce such an incredible ride, I just was absolutely delighted to be there and be part of that event. And people will look back on that 2019 24-hour and just go, that was the year that the game changed. And that was the year that Graham just showed people what you could really do if you do it properly. And it was a pleasure to watch him do it. And sometimes I'm not sure whether people believe me or not, but you know, there was absolutely no way I was going to get close to him. He was on a different level. And to see someone doing that in a sport that you know so much about and you feel so close to is fantastic. It really was an outstanding ride.
Wow. Well, on that note, I think we're going to have to draw it to an end. I'd like to thank you both for such an incredibly inspiring chat. I'd like to think of it more as a fireside chat than a panel event. And I think what we can learn from that, I think long distance events equals lots and lots of really nice, supportive people. And it sounds like a really, really fun thing to be involved in. And certainly inspirational wise, I'm somebody who isn't naturally tuned to doing long distance rides, but it makes me want to be part of it, even if I want to support it. And we've got some great tips there about how you can, you know, shut things off mentally and just get really, really tuned into the event. And you had some great advice on riding your first 100 miles and good nutrition advice. And I love the bit about the inspirational people that you've met through your attempts and through your riding. As a thank you from Newbie Velo, we're pleased to be able to donate £100 to charity on both of your behalves. And we asked both of them which charity they'd like to support. And they've gone for World Bicycle Relief, which is a great charity. And they use bicycles to empower women and facilitate education on all kinds of really, really good stuff they get involved in. I'm a Zwifter and I see them doing an awful lot of these rides on Zwift, and I know Zwift themselves have got behind some of their charity initiatives as well. In a long line of thank yous, I'd also like to thank Rog Davis, and he runs Kingsley Design and Print, and he's got all these really pretty graphics that you can see around us, and all the branding that we've got with Newbie Velo, you know, the Newbie Velo pink, which is pretty famous now. But I'd like to thank both Mike and Jonathan for some truly inspiring words there, and I really hope that everyone who's been listening today has got a lot out of it. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll do another one of these soon. I'd love to have you both back. But we'll do another one of these soon, and get inspired. Go and look at that RRA website and see which records you can get broken yourself. Thank you for joining us, and good evening.